Yeah, I know it's been like 2 days, but yeah, how you been in those 2 days, man?
Not too bad, I suppose. Everything's more or less normal for the most part.
About like basically the same. Yeah, I get that, man. Myself, it's pretty much it's pretty much the course here, and regarding this review that we have cooked up here, I'm ready to rock and roll.
Cool. Let's get this show on the road.
And welcome back, everybody, to the best music podcast on all sides of planet Earth. And the way that we measure that is we go from Ukraine to Uganda, but the long way around. This podcast is called Hey, Listen to This, and it is hosted by two dashingly good-looking men who share the same middle name. I'm the one. I am the only. I am the one who eats apples, Ryan James Kearns.
And I am the one, the only, the I guess I eat apples too, Matthew James Durzik. And for those of you who don't know what this show is, it's pretty much right there in the title. It's called Hey, Listen to This, where me and Ryan look at each other and say, hey, listen to this, and we choose an album of our liking, whether it's an album we like, an album that's on the charts, something like a comfort album that we've had in the past, or in the case of this month, something that follows a certain theme. And this month, we have been discussing albums for Pride Month, which been featuring members of the LGBT community. And Ryan, what did we cover last time out?
So we covered the 2016 release by Frank Ocean, and to be honest with you, most recent release by that artist, and that album was called Blonde, and it was a great time for me to go back to that album personally. That album holds a special place, within the Ryan Kearns canon in terms of his musical journey, because it was definitely one of those like memory albums of when it came out during the summer. Like, it was just peak moment there. But yeah, I was happy to do that review with you last week.
I was happy to do that review too because it had been a while since I really dug into some mid-2010s R&B like that, and it was a nice time to just sort of experience what, for lack of a better term, the hype was all about, because I know Blonde was one of those albums that really divided a lot of people, and to some slight extent, the two of us as well. But I'm not going to spoil that part of it any further. If you want to check out our thoughts in full about that, you could go ahead and check out the episode either right now or whenever this episode is done. So this week, we are going to be finishing up our Pride Month coverage for 2025. Ironically enough, with the oldest album that we have ever done on this show. We are going all the way back, and I'm going to correct myself from last time out. I had said it was from 1956. It was actually released in 1957, which still clears the title for oldest album by a couple of years. And that's the album Here's Little Richard by Little Richard. Now, for those of you wondering what a Little Richard is, the man Little Richard was born Richard Wayne Penniman on December 5th, 1932, and he was nicknamed the Architect of Rock and Roll. Now, why was he named that? Well, when rock and roll had its first explosion back in the mid-50s, he was probably the pioneer among all of them, and there are names that are in that same category, whether you want to talk about Sam Cooke, whether you want to talk about Ray Charles, Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly. Little Richard was right smack dab in the middle of that. Jerry Lee Lewis is another name I'd throw in there. And so Little Richard was a piano player, and he was a singer, and both of those are understatements, as we will discuss over the course of this album because Little Richard, for those who have never heard any of his songs, first of all, you've come to the right place. We're going to be talking a lot about that today. But secondly, he was very wild. He had a very wild, flamboyant style of singing, and in a lot of ways, a wild, flamboyant style of playing piano. And why are we bringing him up in this discussion for Pride Month? Well, the technical term for what he was is what is now considered pansexual. However, he once described it to David Letterman as being omnisexual. And basically, he was a man who attracted to pretty much everybody. Not everybody, but theoretically everybody. He did have relationships with men. He had relationships with women. And he also had some other details of his life that I am not going to discuss at this time for the sake of retaining some measure of wholesomeness. But, yeah, he was a very interesting character behind the scenes, and a very interesting character on the record as well, whenever it came to his personal appearances, his shows, and just his music on record. Now, before I get into my understanding of Little Richard, or my sort of background on him personally, Ryan, I'll kick it over to you to discuss what your history with Little Richard has been.
So, my history with Little Richard and, why is he so little, it's basically, like, I equate it to, like, knowing who Buddy Holly is, who B.B. King is, who these, historical musical figures of the past are, and respecting who they are. And if I come across a song on the radio and I recognize it and, coming right out of the gate, we're gonna, talk about said song, starting this album here, I would be like, oh, hey, cool. I know that Tutti Frutti is done by Little Richard. But outside of that, I couldn't, outside of Tutti Frutti specifically and, this album, I mean, I've never listened to this album prior to this review. And, like most living organisms out there, I've listened to Tutti Frutti and, enjoyed it. So, yeah, that's basically my background and experience with Mr. Richard and why is he so little.
Yeah. My experience with Little Richard is kind of in that same ballpark. I, too, had heard Tutti Frutti going up. In fact, my exposure to that song, or at least what I remember as my exposure to that song, was from a film from 1995 entitled It Takes Two, starring Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, Kirstie Alley, and Steve Guttenberg. About as 90s as you could possibly get. And that was a killer soundtrack. That was on there. Cantaloupes by Us Three was on there. Hippie Hippie Shake was on there. There were some good oldies on that track. But Tutti Frutti, in the infamous food fight scene for anybody who has ever seen that movie. And then over the years, some other songs that I became aware of, particularly on this album, because he was the first one to record them, songs like Jenny Jenny, Long Tall Sally, not on this album, Good Golly Miss Molly, and also the versions that were done by other artists. For instance, the Beatles did Long Tall Sally, Mitch Wright of the Detroit Wheels, they covered Good Golly Miss Molly along with Devil Little Blue Dress, etc., etc., etc. I think they also covered Jenny Jenny too. So yeah, Little Richard became a somewhat historical figure. And the other part of this I'll add, before we get into the actual review of it, is that whenever I have the book from 2003, they've changed it I think twice since then, but I had the original book of the Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Albums of All Time, and they had this at number 50. So this is an album that has a little bit of high praise to it, or at least that was the case. I think it's in the 300s now. On the latest edition in 2020, because of course it is Rolling Stone and consistency where you're going to find the drawn line. So yeah, I've always kind of had this thought in the back of my mind. It's like, oh, well, this is an album that's like considered to be really great. Then it's worth checking out. So now here we are in 2025, ready to discuss some Little Richard. And are you ready, Ryan?
Yeah, man, I'm absolutely ready, and I'm really excited to dive into the album, considering the a lot of people cite Little Richard as the foundation for rock and roll, and specifically with this being his debut album. Okay, so the music that we enjoy so much today, where did it all start from? So yeah, I'm ready to get at her.
All right, so let's get right into it with the opening track and quite easily the most famous track, which is Tutti Frutti. And even though this album was released in 1957, this was still at a time where albums, particularly rock and roll albums, were not really a thing yet. And we'll get into the weird twists and turns regarding this song as it being part of this album. But the original single for Tutti Frutti was released in 1955. So this is 2 years after the fact that this is leading off the album. And for those who wonder what Tutti Frutti is, it's an Italian phrase meaning all fruits. And before I even get into anything else involving the song, that's the kind of title that makes you realize, once you kind of understand who Little Richard is, that he's probably in on the joke. It's a crass joke, but it is, understandable in a certain context, but I'm not going to dive too much further into that for the sake of, avoiding being canceled. So, this song, it starts off with him just going, a wop bop a loo bop a lop bam boom, and obviously now we know what that means, at least as far as what it means in the context of, oh, a wop bop a loo bop a lop bam boom, Tutti Frutti's on, hell yeah. But this is years after rock and roll has shape-shifted so many times. Could you imagine not hearing rock and roll until you heard this song? You're in the era of Sinatra and Rosemary Clooney and Jimmy Dorsey and Tony Bennett, and all of a sudden, this guy, this dude from the South, gets behind the microphone and says that, and you're just like, what on earth is this? And then it gets into the meat of the song, which is just pure hardcore R&B for the mid 1950s. Great rhythm section. We're gonna dive more into that later on in the review, but the rhythm section sounds great. The piano from Little Richard sounds great. He's singing his ass off on the verses one at a time. There's not a note here that he doesn't shout in its most musical form, and it just comes off so well. But yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about this song without kind of already knowing what it is. If you have not heard this song, which I would be shocked if you didn't, you kind of know how wild it is, even for the 1950s. And the twisted part about all this is, again, the song itself was released in 1955. The album didn't come out until 1957. And by this point, this song had already been covered. And not only was it covered, it was covered by freaking Elvis on his debut album. Do you know how old you have to be covered by Elvis on his debut? And not only is that a sign of history, but it is also a sign of respect that Elvis, looking to make his name in rock and roll, would turn to a song like this in order to gain some rock and roll cred, and perhaps some R&B cred as well, because this song is an R&B titan of the 1950s. And shocker, it's my favorite song on the album, because it's got so much historical context. It sounds crazy and wild even to this day. If you imagine someone covering this today, like an open mic night, you'd think, oh wow, okay, this song kind of is crazy. It's so embedded in history that you don't think about that, but if you brought it back now, it would just sound so much different from everything else. So yeah, Tutti Frutti, it's a part of rock and roll history for a good reason.
Absolutely. And before I give my thoughts about Tutti Frutti, contextual sake with you in this review, do you have a top three, bottom three?
I have one of those, and that's a top three. I do not have a bottom three.
Oh, okay. So I have a top three, and I actually have a bottom three with this album here, and
Wow.
I'm gonna come out of the gates with you hand in hand and being like, yeah, Tutti Frutti is easily the best song on this whole album. It's iconic for a reason. Like, I was thinking about like the energy that Little Richard brings to this track here, and like other tracks on the album, and this might be an interesting like comparison, but it's basically channeling the energy and the spirit of like hardcore punk in that like you're really letting like the music and the instrumentation and just the feeling of the performance really like take you over. Like a little fun fact about Little Richard and like the recording of like this album here specifically, a lot of the recordings had to be tampered down just so like they were able to get it like on tape. Like live performances from Little Richard back in the day, whenever he was performing, he was like really establishing his own path, were just so flipping crazy, and like it was very hard to capture that on live tape. Now, I'll give you credit, man. I don't know if you didn't know this or you just, kind of skirted by this, but I'm gonna just skirt right into this in terms of the alternative, the alternative meaning to Tutti Frutti. And so you got the Tutti Frutti all fruits thing that Matt mentioned, but in his autobiography, Richard admitted like about the chorus and how it was censored, and the original chorus was supposed to go Tutti Frutti, good booty. If it don't fit, don't force it. You can grease it, make it easy. So Tutti Frutti, oh Rudy. That's basically about anal sex. Fun. And like, considering like the rest of the lyrics, like the verses are, I got a girl named Sue, she knows just what to do. Like, oh my gosh. Okay, cool. Yeah. So fun lyrical content there. I give Richard all props for like really coming out there at the time, because like again, contextual sake, 1950s when this was coming out, and like the societal zeitgeist in terms of like what was considered moral and like righteous, like people like used to wear suits to the movie theater, so like just to put that into perspective nowadays. So yeah, outside of like the lyrical context and like just the Tutti Frutti, the opening phrase that you were talking about, there's a kind of a dual meaning with that as well. Like, apparently that opening phrase initially was just Richard vocalizing a drum fill he wanted to open up the song with. And also, interestingly enough, I also read that it's apparently a clapback that he used as a dishwasher in Georgia against his boss. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to organically practice saying that opening bar to Tutti Frutti and just use it as a clapback for, like, the right moment, man.
I mean, I trying to use a wop bop a loo bop a lot bamboon as a clapback, it reminds me way too much of Prom Night 2 that I'm going to advise against you doing that. Like, it just seems like you would stick out so much like a sore thumb, like everyone in the room would just be like, wait, why would you say that? What does that mean? Why are you walking away? Please come back. But a couple other thoughts on Tutti Frutti before we move on. First of all, I agree with you that it does have that sort of punk rebel spirit that you mentioned. Like, I can imagine someone like even the Ramones covering this with some sort of reverence and understanding of what it means, although much louder and angrier from a sonic standpoint. And secondly, from a sonic standpoint, I'm going to harken back to something I said about a month ago when we were talking about System of a Down, and particularly the song Bounce, because you mentioned that this song is about anal sex. But even if you didn't know that or never found out about that, which, some people still probably don't, this is a song that so musically is powerful out of context. Like, basically, the music out of the context of the lyrics is so powerful that you don't even pay attention to what the lyrics are. And granted, if Little Richard had gone with the original lyrics, I don't think that would have been possible because, imagine him singing about those lyrics with his voice. Like, that would ultimately be, like, more devil's music than any other rock and roll that came before or after it. Again, not necessarily kink-shaming here, I'm just throwing out a fact. But yeah, man, it just... The fact that it sounds so powerful musically is why it became a hit and why it's lasted the test of time. Because it's just... Performance-wise, you're not going to get much better than this as far as early rock and roll.
Absolutely, man. So... That being said, you cool if we boogie on over to True Fine Mama?
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Alright, so True Fine Mama, we get a shift in gears, stylistic-wise. We get more into like what I would like to call like a blues shuffle boogie kind of, track here with True Fine Mama. It starts out pretty excellent, in my opinion, with that piano intro. Like, one thing, you alluded to at the start of this review when you're talking about, Little Richard and who he is, as a performer. He is an excellent piano player. In the previous track, he was more, just hammering and really just, becoming possessed. Here, there's a little bit more technical, groove to it, and I love the groove that is established by that. And speak about groove, the bass part as well, it's pretty simplistic, but it's performed pretty well, and it's recorded pretty well, too. And it does serve the purpose of, driving a groove and, really just settling the listener into the track here. Now, in terms of lyrical content, obviously, with this kind of album here, we're not going to dive too much into the lyrics per se, because as we discussed with Tutti Frutti, a lot of his material in that Little Richard is about feeling, as opposed to really just being a Bob Dylan or a Joni Mitchell type. And that's just who Little Richard is. He is who he is, and Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell are who they are. But that being said, here, I feel like with True Fine Mama, I interpreted the song to be about Richard wanting his partner not to leave because she's, on drugs. And, you get the lyric, she's really on the ball. And, that might be the furthest stretch that I could make in terms of, dissecting lyrics in this album here. But, yeah, outside of the lyrics, though, I was digging the background vocals and, the interplay that Richard was executing with them. But if I could be honest with you, at the very end, the repetition of the phrase, honey, 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 kind of got a bit old after a hot minute. Because, I know they were trying to establish a groove, but maybe just change up the words. They were doing so well earlier in the track with, just having fun and playing off of each other. So, yeah, that's just a minor critique that I have off of that there. And also, didn't mention in Tutti Frutti, but yeah, pretty much for every single track here, you get a sax solo. And I didn't rank the sax solos, and also fun fact, the saxophonist sometimes changes out here. So they're all great. If anyone has been a fan of the show over the course of our runtime here so far, anytime that there's a sax solo or a horn part, I always give a song kudos because that is the calling of my people. But yeah, in terms of True Fine Mama, it's we shift we shift into a different direction in terms of like style and like just overall quality of a song. But to be fair, it's kind of hard to follow up Tutti Frutti and like the energy that brings. So yeah, it's a fine song.
You could even say it's a true fine song, if you will. But no, I'm pretty much right there with you with True Fine Mama. This is just pretty much straightforward R&B for the 1950s. Like, even though rock and roll itself hadn't really coalesced into its own identity yet, the R&B scene was very much leaning towards that direction. Like, you think about older songs by Ike Turner, for example, or Fats Domino. Like, this falls right in line with stuff like that. I wholeheartedly agree that piano at the start is amazing. It's just really, really good. And honestly, the first time I heard the background vocals, I thought, okay, kind of weird, but they kind of grew on me on the next listen. I thought they were all right. And as far as this following up Tutti Frutti, of course, that isn't fair. I agree with you. But I'm also going to say, too, like, you talk about this not being Bob Dylan or Joni Mitchell or, whoever you want to throw in that singer-songwriter category. I agree with you, but at the same time, that wasn't even a thought yet. Like, that was, like, late 60s, early 70s. This is the mid-50s. Like, they're just kind of getting their feet wet and trying to, not only create some good, like, dance music and good rock and roll music, but they're also just trying to make some money. Like, let's just be honest about this. This is a record designed to sell, and when you... Like you said with Tutti Frutti, a lot of the lyrics on here are pretty much, not even worth analyzing because it's all about the performance. And the performance on here is pretty good. It's not as good as Tutti Frutti, but it's pretty good. And for that, that ends my thoughts on this song because you pretty much explained the majority of the rest of them in your dissertation.
All right, fair enough, my friend. And yeah, one could make the argument that, like, Little Richard ran, Little Richard walked, so Bob Dylan could run. So, I mean, like, evolution of rock and roll 101 right there. So, I feel like we are ready to move on to the next track here, which is Can't Believe You Wanna Leave.
Yes, Can't Believe You Wanna Leave. And here we get an even slower song than True and Fine Mama, which itself was slower than Tutti Frutti. This is a very slow Southern New Orleans type of soul. And it's a good song, too. It's weird because for the first time, Little Richard, at least for the first half of this song, for the first, I would even say 2/3, he doesn't shout like our ears are accustomed to, whether it be people picking up this album in 1955 or us listening to it in 2025, 70 years later, or 68 technically, because this was released in 1957. I need to fuse that into my brain. Like, it's just... it feels a lot more drawn back at the start, like he's actually just trying to sing the melody with his just natural accent. Like, he's not trying to do rock and roll. He's trying to do, like, R&B. And aside from that, the backing band sounds good. You don't hear the piano quite as much because it's a ballad. But, woof, that sax solo is quite something else. Like, that is a really good sax solo for a song this slow. But, yeah, like, it's nice to hear a change of pace as far as the album goes, because you go from, fast and crazy to slightly slower but still pretty hopping to just a slow stroll of a song. And it's proving Little Richard's performance skills, not to mention his backing bands, quite well. So, I dug the song.
I dug the song like a great deal, too. And I'm going to, one thing that we didn't discuss in, like, Tutti Frutti, but it's executed pretty well here and Can't Believe You Want to Leave. It's just a random stops that occur throughout the track. Like I'm always a fan of that, and especially with how Little Richard performs. Like, specifically within Tutti Frutti, but you also get moments here. Like everything's halted on a momentum, and you can it really drives the feeling. It really just adds to the texture and like the overall composition of the song. So always a fan of that personally. And the vocal performance that Richard is delivering here, yeah, you said it wasn't so screamy or possessed or riding that high energy that Tutti Frutti was bringing. But I'm a huge fan of the overall performance that he was delivering here. Like, I think it's one of the strongest off the whole album, if I can be so bold. And it's mainly because of the context of the song. I mean, I'm not even going to go into the lyrical context because the song is literally called Can't Believe You Want to Leave. It's songs about heartbreak. Duh. But yeah, just the overall performance that he's really doing and how just everything is coming together. It's a really nice blues song, and I heard the piano a little bit more pronounced than you did because I really was digging the piano and the drum groove that was established throughout the whole track. I thought they did a lot of great work carrying the momentum of the song. Yeah, I have no other notes other than we've arrived at one of my top. The other, well, Tutti Frutti was number one. We've arrived at another one of my top three, and I Can't Believe You Want to Leave actually landed at number 3.
All right, I can respect that. I can respect this being your top 3. Like it's a really good song, and like I said, that sax solo is right up your alley, my alley, everybody else's alley as far as saxophone solos go. But you're right too with the fact that it's just a great performance that is a solid contrast to Tutti Frutti as far as feel and style, and if we're also being honest to some degree, lyrical content, even though there's not a lot to dive into because, like you said, it's Can't Believe You Want to Leave. It's about heartbreak. Duh.
Yeah, and it's not to discount the overall song in its own sense. It's still really nice and refreshing to go back to songs like this. So also just old school blues songs and really witness and experience human emotion expressing grief. So yeah, I'm always a fan of that. So I think I'm ready to rock and roll over to the next track. Ready, Teddy, if you can so indulge me.
I can definitely indulge you. That was a lot of readies, but I'm ready to go.
All right. So yeah, we shift back into the year of Tutti Frutti, and the overall downbeat stops that I hinted at and talked about with Can't Believe You Want to Leave. They're executed pretty well here, and yeah, the overall feel that Richard was going for vocally here, it's very much still in the vein of Tutti Frutti, where just really just you're out in the town and you're just jiving, you're down at the sock hop and you're just you're really just enjoying life and all that good jazz. And yeah, it does execute that to a T, and I love that. And yeah, just I'm digging the piano and the drums are they're doing a lot of good work and during the course, and actually the sax solos too. And also the sax solo here was fantastic. I'm always a fan of sax solos. I'm going to talk about on much of this review here, just overall. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say other than this is still very much in the vein of Tutti Frutti, and maybe if things were changed up a little bit, maybe it would increase the song's value in my eyes. But yeah, if this track would have came first and then Tutti Frutti would have came second to the public consciousness, maybe I would appreciate Ready Teddy a little bit more. So it's not a bottom track by any means, but yeah, it's a fine track.
Yeah, pretty much right there with you. And I'm not going to fault him too much for basically copying, pasting Tutti Frutti to the fourth track on the same album. Because again, as I said with Tutti Frutti, that song was released in 1955. This album was released 2 years later. So by this time, the world has known Tutti Frutti. America has known Tutti Frutti. They've bought Tutti Frutti. And these guys aren't idiots. They said, all right, well, that song kicked ass. Let's put this song on the record. Hopefully it kicks some ass too. And surprise, it does. Because it's very much just in the same... I mean, it even rhymes the same way that Tutti Frutti does. Ready, Teddy, Tutti Frutti. Like, they knew exactly what they were doing, and they do it very well. So yeah, I really don't have a whole lot else to add either. Like, you could probably put this into rotation at your local car cruise or vintage sock hop if you go to a institution that does such things. Yeah, no, I thought the song was pretty good too. Like it's 100% a Tutti Frutti knockoff. But if you're gonna rip something off, you might as well rip off something great, and they did, and it works.
So one other note that I want to throw at the listener about, like, Ready Teddy before we shift on over to Baby, I just had this thought, like, a lot of the chorus has the word ready in it. Like, like I would say a good, 67% of the words in this track here are the word ready. And we talked about, earlier when we were talking about Tutti Frutti and how, Richard was going for, this, almost like punk rock kind of feel, like really just embracing the feel of the track. And I'm going to make another wild comparison here with Ready Teddy. So Ready Teddy, chorus, lyrics don't matter, really just just really getting the listener into the groove of the feel of the song. Same could be said about Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter. Like, a lot of people don't really care about the lyrics there. It's more about, oh, yeah, hey, just out on the beach, just out on the town, just really just diving. So, yeah. So, Little Richard walked, so Sabrina Carpenter could run.
Well, I know what I'm putting on your headstone. Yeah, that's an interest. But you know what? I dig it because you're absolutely right. Both those songs fall in the same category of who gives a damn about the lyrics. It's all about the beat. It's all about the feel. And in both song cases, it does really, really well. But yeah, I was not expecting you to say that in regards to the song.
Yeah, that's the thing about me. When you expect one thing, I just turn the tables, and I'm like, oh, hey, look over there. Let me turn these tables. But in the meantime, are you ready to boogie on over to Baby?
Yes, Baby. And here we have another song that sort of falls on the same line as True Fi Mama. It's basically just following the pattern of fast, medium, slow, fast, and now we're at medium. But his voice on this track, I did note, sounded a lot smoother at the start. Kind of like Can't Believe You Want to Leave. Like, it sounds really smooth. Like, almost like he's putting on, a character. Like, it sounds so far away from what Ready Teddy and Tutti Frutti did. Like, you're just thinking, wait, is this even the same guy? But then, after the solo, it sounds a lot more like Little Richard, basically putting his shout on that last set of lyrics. And I really thought the drum work by Earl Palmer, who is the drummer for, I want to say, 10 out of the 12 tracks on this album, is really, really, really good. Earl Palmer is like a historic drummer. Like, he performed with Little Richard. He performed with a lot of different New Orleans singers throughout the 50s. And then in the 60s, he would be immortalized on the song You Lost That Loving Feeling by the Righteous Brothers. He is the drummer on that song as well. But he just does a great, great job here of providing a solid beat for the song. And lyrically, granted, this is many years before Justin Bieber used the name Baby as a song, but it's not too far off from the meaning. Baby, it's a love song to his baby girl. Roll credits.
Yeah, fun fact, when you were discussing your thoughts and feelings about Baby here. Like, I did Google the lyrics for Baby, and the Justin Bieber song came up as first, even though I was going through the Google link of Here's Little Richard. But, I'm not Google, so
No.
I don't. Yeah. Anyways, just, here's Little Richard. So, yeah, Baby. I'm going to start by maybe challenging your interpretation of the lyrics here, because the lyrics, don't you need a man like me? We could be so happy together, try to raise a family. And then, like, in the next stanza, you get, baby, sorry, I gotta go. And the whole stanza ends with, I'm going to come back to see you, baby, when you want to love me some more. And I walked away from that set of lyrics of being like, oh, this almost seems like a casual relationship thing, being like, oh, and like, not to sound too woke and, getting on a high horse, because, we all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of Joni Mitchell. But anyways, yeah.
Wow.
Like for me, hearing that and hearing those lyrics, it almost seems like, in this case, like the song's narrator is almost trying to gaslight this other person into being like, hey, like, we could build a life together, and like, oh, I gotta go because you don't want to love me. Oh, now you want to love me, and like, love could actually stand for like, smooshing booties, if you know what I mean. But yeah, like, I just wanted to point that out. Outside the lyrical context, it's a fine song. Like, I initially was gonna say, like, coming right out of the gate, like, I didn't really like the vocal performance that Richard was executing here. But, as the song grew, like, you get more passion and more, like, zest behind his performance. So, like, I was a fan of it. Sax solo is solid. And just the overall, like, shuffle groove that the backing band is executing here, it's refreshing to hear that, compared to, like, if we get more tracks that ride the Tutti Frutti wave. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be finding more tracks that ride that Tutti Frutti wave coming up here relatively shortly. But yeah, I was a fan of that. And just the only other thing I got to mention is the section where you get the horn hits and the horn pops countering Richard vocals, like, Little Richard's vocals there. Like, I thought that was an excellent touch. So, yeah, maybe I should be a little bit higher on Baby overall. I think maybe because of just the casualness of the lyrics and, like, the performance not starting off the best by Little Richard, maybe held it back from the top 3 spot. But it's a fine track. I have no other beefs other than that.
Yeah, no, it's a fine track in my book. Like, it's not necessarily something that's going to super stand out. And again, it's not only casual lyrically, but it's very casual musically, and definitely feels like an album track. But again, this was the 1950s. They weren't even considering, like, hey, this is not going to be a single or not a single. I mean, they probably thought that a little bit, but not to the point where it's as meticulous as it is today. So I am cool with heading on over to the final track of side A on this record, and that is Slippin and Slidin, if you're ready to talk about that.
Absolutely, my dude. So, yeah, with Slippin and Slidin, we shift into another gear here, like somewhere in between Can't Believe You Want to Leave and, Ready Teddy, like, in terms of, like, tempo and, like, overall pace. Because Slipping and Sliding, like, it's a really good song. I was really just, the immediate thing that drew me into the song overall was the fact that the horns were doing such a good job laying down a foundation for, like, just the overall groove of the track. Like, they did excellent work, and the way that was complemented by Little Richard's piano, work was just, pretty great, man. And, like, Like the way that even with how Richard was like laying down like some excellent work during the sax solo and slipping and sliding, I thought that was pretty good as well. But in terms of like vocally, like I would say, like slipping and sliding is probably like the like I want to say like the least effective performance by Richard vocally, but it's definitely on like a dialed back scale, and like it's just I think the instrumentation and the overall performance by the instruments was the main focus here, and like that is evident by the fact that we got a second sax solo like in this economy. Oh my goodness, man! I'm a huge fan of that. And just the overall like meaning and like the context behind slipping and sliding, I took it as one or two things. Either one, it could be about like smooshing booties, or just maneuvering through a relationship. And you can take either meaning and just run with it. There's no wrong answers at that point. Another note that I had about slipping and sliding is I thought it was interesting how each verse ends with "won't be your fool no more," and I thought that was a excellent use of like lyric writing, and I did dig it. But yeah, just again, this wasn't my second favorite track off the album, but it wasn't obviously like it didn't do enough to like land into a bottom track territory. So like I very much like I'll put this up there with like maybe like Baby in terms of like performance and like overall appreciation about the track.
So first of all, I will recognize that you have not mentioned any one of your bottom three tracks, and we have 6 songs to go, so we're in for a wild ride in the second half. But aside from that, yeah, I honestly this track was probably gonna be my. It was between this and another one that was gonna be in my top 3, and I chose another one. So this is probably like my number 4 for this album. Like this track is really, really good to me. And I agree that his performance, his vocals are a little more subdued than they have been, but I kind of like that. Like it felt a bit more, in tune with the content of the song, which is again slipping and sliding, peeping and hiding, won't be your fool no more. It has sort of this slinky underside of who's cheating who and who's being true, and I think for him to shout that like probably would not have done it justice. But I really like the drums. I really like the piano. I really like the sax solo on this song. Like this is just a classic car cruise type of song. Like you could pump this out your speakers and everyone's having a good time. The beat's there, the vocals are there, everything's pretty much there. So yeah, I like Slippin' and Sliding quite a bit, probably a little bit more than you do, but did not quite crack my top 3.
And to be honest with you, dude, like it was definitely like I know I literally just didn't put it in my top 3, but it was definitely highlight off the record for me. So like years down the road, if I were ever to like revisit this album on a whim, like I would be like, oh yeah, hey, I dig Slippin' and Slidin'. Like it's a good kind of feel like car cruise, feel like you just mentioned there. So yeah, I can understand your appreciation for that. So before we go over to discuss what is a long, tall Sally, Matt, I have a question for you, and I've been meaning to ask this all my life.
And what is that question, Ryan?
If the listener out there that's listening to this very episode right now is slipping and sliding through this review and just really enjoying the journey that we're taking them on in terms of like discussing Little Richard as a whole, and even if they're like they've listened to more than one episode of our material, like what are some ways that they want to give back and they want to show support for the excellent content we deliver on a week in, week out basis?
There it is, the question he's been wanting to ask his entire life. He knew from a young age he wanted to ask me that question, that very specific question about our podcast audience. Now, in all seriousness, the way they can support us is by continuing to listen to this, and by finding us on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, whether it be Pocket Cast, Spotify, Apple Music, good old-fashioned RSS if you want to go that route. I don't know if we actually have an RSS feed. That's just, me dating myself very hardcore. We also have a YouTube page where you can listen to our episodes as we post them in video format every week. So if you use YouTube Music, you can plop us into there, or YouTube Premium, if you will. Also, we are on social media as well. We're on Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. The tag is ttheylisten for all of them if you want to find us there. And we also have a email if you want to message us directly, but you do not know us personally. And that is ttheylisten@gmail.com. Again, that is ttheylisten@gmail.com. And if you like what you hear, tell a friend, get the word out, put it on your socials. And for those who have done that so far, we thank you very much because, again, as we've said a lot this year, we're not sponsored by any major brands. We're not part of any major podcast network. We're just two dudes who like to talk music, and we thank you for joining us on this ride.
And I want to thank Matthew here for taking this ride with me, because it's been one hell of a journey. We've gone from the halls of the tortured poets department to discovering what a Toledo feels like, and we experienced that while wearing fishnets and smoking cigarettes. But anyways, maneuvering on over to the back half of the record, and the first song off the back half is Long, Tall Sally.
Yes, Long, Tall Sally kicks off the second half of this record, and what a way to kick it off. This is just more of that good hard rock and roll that made Little Richard a legend. You've been mentioning throughout this review, Ryan, those stops on the beat that occur throughout these songs. That's just how it hooks you in on this one, and it does a great job executing that. And once again, Little Richard is screaming his lungs out on this record and trying to just push as heavy as he possibly can, especially when it sings, "My baby, yeah, my baby." The woos are hard, the screams are hard, everything is just pushed to the max. Same with the saxophone, same with the drums. And even when you get past, what the song is, which is almost seems like a song of technicality more so than any type of story. You have Long Tall Sally who jumped back in the alley with some bald-headed man or some combination of that. He's screaming so loud you don't care. And the band is playing so loud you don't care. It's just tearing it up so hard. And this is the kind of thing where I think about it being covered by the Beatles, and Paul McCartney tried to do his best Little Richard, and it makes me think, okay, this song was created as a challenge to any rock and roller who dare come in his path. You think you could cover me? Try this on for size. I like Long Tall Sally quite a bit, and it just edged out Slippin and Slidin to reach my top 3 at number 3.
So it's your, Long Tall Sally is in your top 3 at number 3. Alright, so do you remember our Wilco episode, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, right?
I do remember that episode, and I'm curious as to where you're going with this.
Do you remember what the opening track was called?
I Am Trying to Break Your Heart.
Yep, and that's what I feel like I'm doing right now, man. So with Long Tall Sally. So we've arrived at one of my least favorite tracks off the whole record. And I'll start with the positives because, I'm a positive kind of guy most days. But the the vocals by Little Richard are great here. He's executing everything to a T. The piano groove and the drum groove are solid. The sax solo is fantastic. I love that. and just the stop and hits that occur in terms of like what we discussed at several points in this review so far with like Ready Teddy and then like Tutti Frutti, but yeah, like at this point in the record we're like over halfway into the record. We're 7 tracks deep, and we're riding another wave of Tutti Frutti in terms of just overall feel and elements, and like things are starting to get a little bit thin in terms of the appreciation that I have for that kind of vibe, because like we've heard excellent performances and like excellent styles that were executed like prior to this, like you get Slipping and Slidin, you also get Can't Believe You Want to Leave, and there's also another track later on in the record. I'm not going to spoil which one it is because it does land in my top 3, that executes like this hyper feel but doesn't like lean so much into those elements, that doesn't in my head come off as a Tutti Frutti ripoff. But yeah, Long Tall Sally is basically another Tutti Frutti ripoff, and I'm getting a little annoyed with that. At this point, I'm getting a little bit of listener fatigue, and that's saying something because this record is only 28 minutes long. So, I'm getting listener fatigue 7 tracks in. That's saying something for my appreciation about the record. And in terms of the lyrical content, the song is basically about a man cheating on his wife, and maybe I'm too woke or too high horsey for my own good, but I was just it just seems like the chorus is just vibing off to the cheating, but maybe taking a step back, maybe this is just telling a story about a wild night that happened. It isn't necessarily green light cheating and infidelity, but I just a little bit of mixed feelings about it. So the main reason why this landed in my bottom 3 here was just the fact that it's another Tutti Frutti ripoff, and I got annoyed by this point in the album with experiencing another ripoff. And I get it, back in the 1950s when this was released, again, they're going off the field, they're going off the energy, they want this song to be played at the local sock hop. But, the year of our Lord 2025, Ryan Jamalothan Kearns here, he doesn't vibe with Long Tall Sally in the context of listening to this album head to toe. So yeah, in terms of official placement, this is my least favorite track off the whole record.
The least favorite, the bottom of the bottom.
The bottom of the barrel. So
wow. That is a very, very bold statement, and you haven't so much broken my heart as blown my mind. I was not expecting that at all. Wow. Okay, all right. So you're not a fan of Long Tall Sally. I am, as I had stated. Although I at least get it. I get where you're coming from with that, because it does, especially when you go front to back, it does get to be a bit monotonous. But I'm willing to forgive that. I mean, I just like the way the song sounds. But I'm also willing to forgive the repetitiveness of it because, again, like you said, this was the 1950s. Not only were they trying to, get this on the sock hops and everything, they weren't even trying to delve into, any type of major emotional feelings like you would get with, a Joni Mitchell's Blue or, Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks, as you mentioned. Or even the Tortured Poets Department, as we discussed a while back. No, these guys were just barely past what does that button do as far as creating rock and roll. So I'm willing to forgive the monotony as long as it sounds good. In this case, I think it sounds really good.
All right, so I feel like we're ready to move on over to Miss Anne if you're cool with it.
I am cool with moving on to Miss Anne.
So with Miss Anne, we we get another like what I would like to call like a blues shuffle groove kind of song, and I kind of dig it. Like I just love whenever I hear like I wouldn't compare like it's well I don't know. Like in my head, I wanted to compare it to "Can't Believe You Want to Leave," but that was more blues emotional. This is just more like kind of like a groovy kind of song, and I did appreciate what that was bringing to the table there. I mean, the overall groove, how it's established for the horns, the piano, and drums, like it's pretty solid. The sax solo again here is pretty solid. Like I would be interested if I ever came across a sax solo ever, and I was just like, that is a subpar sax solo. Get out of my eardrums. Maybe I need to hold sax solos to a higher degree. Future development for me being a music reviewer, podcaster here with you. So, Richard's delivery on the vocals is pretty solid. Like, I really did appreciate that. But yeah, this is going into like the good song bucket, like songs like "Baby," "Slipping and Sliding," and like songs that like don't really stand out for one reason or another, but like don't really do enough to like upset my eardrums in terms of like just being an appreciator of the album to land in the bottom three territory. Like, the only other thing that I'm going to mention about Miss Anne here is like the lyrical content basically kind of seems to be about him falling in love with a fling. And one thing I wanted to highlight is that the last verse here seems a bit possessive with like all this talk about how Anne wants to be free, but he won't let that happen. And a little PSA out there to like any of the younger men out there in the audience. Her body, her choice. If she wants to leave, just let her leave, man. Like you're gonna be a better person for it. You're gonna be a more mature person for it. You're gonna be able to exist in society more. But yeah, to wrap up, Miss Anne, it's okay.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, first of all, not only was this the 1950s and rock and roll was very much in his "what does this button do" stage, but human empathy was kind of also at that "what does this button do" stage, at least as far as American male post World War II empathy. But that's another discussion for another day. Ironically enough, if there was to be a bottom song on this album for me, and there's not one because I think they all sound quite good, it probably would be this one, Miss Anne, because this, ironically enough, is where I thought the record was getting a little monotonous, because while Long Tall Sally and Slippin' and Slidin' did very much repeat the Tutti Frutti pattern, I'm all for it because I thought Tutti Frutti was a great song, and, if the formula doesn't need fixing, don't fix it. But Miss Anne is a little more too conventional R&B, and this just felt like filler for filler's sake. And actually the one weird part of this song is what kept it from being that, which is at the very end of the song where Little Richard does those vocal yelps where he's going, I'm thinking, all right, you know what? I respect that. I respect that choice. It's not the best thing musically, but you know what? It makes me pay attention to the song more so than I was in the first half. I give you full points. Because aside from that, I can't really add anything else, both musically and lyrically, to what you said. Lyrically, it's fine. Performance-wise, it's fine. It's Miss Anne. It's the 8th track on this album. Salute.
It's very much like I think we found the album track in this record here. Like, Miss Anne is very much the definition of an album track where, like, you just do a drive-by of it and it's just like, oh, hey, that wasn't offensive. Like, maybe just having, like, a blueberry scone where it's just like, if you take out the blueberry, maybe it would be a little bit offensive, but it's there. It nourishes you. But in the meantime, are you ready to go into the next track here? Oh, why?
Yes, oh why. Now, this song is another bit of a slow song, but a little different from the slow songs. And it's very much set up almost like a calm response unto itself, where the verses are just basically Little Richard on vocal, and that's it, with just the occasional orchestra hit, almost like a film noir type scenes, like bum, and then he says this, and he says this, and this is what I feel in my heart, bum, da 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 da, and then it goes into the chorus, which is more of a slow R&B type of ballad. I thought that was very fascinating because, again, it broke up the monotony of the typical R&B that we've heard, which, again, great R&B, but very much a formula for formula's sake. Here it feels like they're experimenting just a hair, and I did recognize that, and I recognize too that not only were the parts that seem more dramatic executed to the point of good dramatics, but also that they sound good, as in Little Richard's voice sounds good on them. In fact, I pointed it out as very much a Ryan James Kern's musical kink, which, considering this is the mid-50s, might be the first use of said musical kink in that regard, with just the vocal and nothing else. Curious to see your thoughts on that. But aside from that, it's actually a very short track. It's just barely cracks 2 minutes. And it's fine. I liked it quite a bit. Didn't stand out to me enough to hit my top 3, but it's another solid, certainly better than Miss Anne album track on this album.
I'm a little lower on OY than you are. And,
Why?
And comparing it to Miss Anne, it takes the album's momentum down just a peg. I mean, I appreciate what the track was overall going for. The Ryan Kern's musical kink is there, and the overall structure of this track is solid, with the song basically being a blues song with a calm response, a traditional blues element there. That's fine in its own regard. The sax solo here is really great, but yeah, just the beefs I have with the song is just I feel like it could have been sung maybe just a little bit better, in my opinion. Again, it's a bottom vocal performance from Richard here, because I don't know, hearing how impactful he was in Can't Believe You Want to Leave, and a couple of the other slower kind of songs, he doesn't necessarily need to wail, but I don't know, I wasn't the hugest fan of the vocals here. And just the other thing that I will say is the blues shuffle groove that you get in OY here. It seems like another instance of recycled material within the album. So yeah, outside of those moments though, lyric wise, this song is about Richard being convicted of a crime, and just the overall song, it's basically Richard basically being hey, he doesn't want to plead guilty because quote unquote, you're not mine, but he pleads guilty anyway. So yeah, that's the story there. That was interesting. So yeah, needless to say though, with OY, unfortunately, it does contain a Ryan Kern's musical kink. However, it has landed in a bottom 3 position. It is my third least favorite track on the album.
Wow, so even though my ears were correct, my thought process was wrong. I thought you were going to possibly have this as a dark horse in your top 3, and I was incorrect.
Yeah, you misfired there, but your heart was in the right place, man. I'll give you full credit there, man.
All right, so we still got a little bit of holes left to fill as far as our top and bottom 3s, and we'll see if any of them get filled up on this next track, which is Rip It Up.
So, Rip It Up here, we get another, sock hop kind of jam kind of hey, we're gonna party it up, literally the track opens up, well, it's Saturday night and I just got paid, fool about my money, don't want to try to save, my heart says go have the time, because it's Saturday night and I'm feeling fine, I'm gonna rock it up. Basically 1950s to the T, going out in the town, this is that song, pretty much to a T. And yeah, it has a lot of the elements that we found throughout like a couple of the other tracks in this this album here so far. And yeah, I'm just gonna come out right out of the gate and say this completes the trilogy here. It's my second least favorite track on the album, and only not only for the the recycled kind of feel, but like the chorus, it's a bit deflating, and I don't want to maybe kind of zoom in and maybe call it like an anti-drop, because you just kind of groove into like the I'm gonna rip it up, like the feel that Richard was going for here, or should have gone for with a song called Rip It Up, is he should have ripped it up. Like, in terms of, like, on the instrumental palette, and, like, really just, like expanded the sound. But, like, instead of, like, having, like, the horns and, like, the piano really just kind of just grooving in there, it just, you peel back the layers and you just go into, like, a nice little groove. And, like, that didn't land too well in my ears. And to see the way that Richard's vocals, are executed here, it's not the most impactful performance, especially during the chorus. I really didn't like the chorus here. I think that might have been like the main reason why I sunk it so low, because it just like kind of like took out like the momentum of the whole track. But yeah, I will say like a couple of the positive things about this is just like I do like the change up in the instruments, maybe a little bit, with the horns being included. And I feel like maybe the guitar could have been like a little bit executed a little bit better. But yeah, and like the lyrics do, like I mentioned, they do a good job setting the scene for the track. But yeah, this completes the bottom of the barrel trilogy. With this being my second least favorite track off the album, Rip It Up is my second least favorite.
So it's not my second favorite, so we're not going to fight. But I easily higher on this track than you are. I will agree with you that as far as vocal performance, it's not very standout-ish. Lyrically, it's not standout-ish. And you make a good point that for a song called Rip It Up, he really doesn't rip it up. He just sort of holds it up and shows everybody, and that's not the same thing. But I will give credit where credit is due, because I mentioned earlier Earl Palmer, the drummer on the majority of this album. He's on this one too, and I would say this is probably his best performance on the record. Just the way he just does the fast shuffle on the snare, and the way it almost sounds like there's hand claps on the track, even though there's not. Like, I thought that was massively impressive, and that really, really stood out to me. But unfortunately, that is the only part that does stand out. Everything else, like you say, is pretty much run-of-the-mill. Richard sounds alright. He could have been bigger, but he wasn't. Band sounds fine. Solo sounds fine. It's, like you said, it's a to-the-T 1950s sock hop track. And thus, compared to a lot of the other songs we've talked about already, like Tutti Frutti, and in my personal opinion, Long Tall Sally, it doesn't stand out, and therefore finds itself as another album track on this album.
And the track had like a lot of good potential, because like the way it starts out is pretty cool, but Anyways, for the sake of redundancy, I feel like we can safely start talking about Jenny and why she's spinning.
Yes, spinning like a spinning top into Jenny, which is the penultimate track on Here's Little Richard. And now we get an example of Richard actually ripping it up, because he is singing like nuts here, and this is what you were talking about. This is what stands out. Like, the band is going full force, he is going full force, and this sounds like what Rip It Up should have been. Like, it just goes so hard. Obviously lyrically it's nothing to necessarily divulge into super linguistically or literally. It's, he's going Jenny, Jenny, spinning like a spinning top, spinny, spinny, ooh, spinny, spin. Like, this is more, again, about technicality on the vocals and trying to just go for that hard-edged R&B rock and roll feel. But I think he does a great job on it, particularly. His voice stand out big time here. This is another certified car cruise banger, and there's a reason why Mitch Ryder would cover this so many years later to, put Detroit hard rock on the map. Yeah, now I like this song quite a bit, and we have completed my top 3. This is number 2.
I can dig that, man. I can dig that. And so with Jenny Jenny here, the penultimate track on the record of Here's Little Richard, it's funny that, for like the main critiques that I've had with the record up until this point, because I have no more critiques. I mean, I might have a critique here or there, but spoiler alert, I don't. But just how we get recycled materials and how he's trying to capture the feeling of Tutti Frutti. But the way, you mentioned it coming right out of the gate with Jenny Jenny, the way that he's able to capture the feeling here, it's really good. I love the performance. It's an overall amazing song. The one thing I want to mention about the lyrics and the way Richard's able to perform them. Richard, as a vocalist, was known for his hyper vocals and his ad libs as well. Yes, 97% of the song is Jenny and spinning, but in between there, you get some ad libs from Richard that are executed so well that you can almost see that he's getting really excited about performing the song. And I actually made a note, at certain points it seems like he gets so excited to the point that he gets out of pocket, and I absolutely love that, man. That was an excellent moment for me. And just the I don't really have any other notes. The sax solo again is really tight, and it's funny in my notes here I have I'm sure this plays out well within the context of the song, but half of the words are Jenny and spinning, and I wrote a subnote. Yeah, it does play out well. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about Jenny Jenny, and thank goodness we got this track here, because if I heard more ripoffs of Tutti Frutti and lackluster performances from Rip It Up that were trying to rip off Tutti Frutti, I might be a little bit jaded within experiencing this album. But yeah, I'm right there with you, hand in hand. We are experiencing this penultimate track with the same appreciation. Jenny Jenny is my second favorite track off the album. So we've completed my trilogy of the topness now. So
it's kind of funny how we both have the exact same top 2 songs, and that third slot is where things get a little different. It's just sort of like a mix of Duck Duck Goose and Russian roulette. You're not sure which is how crazy things are going to get until we discuss it. But I do appreciate you mentioning that this isn't really a ripoff of Tutti Frutti. It's its own song. It definitely it's as hard and as fast and as passionate as Tutti Frutti, but doesn't sound the same. It feels like the same ingredients but a different formula. It's kind of like the old Taco Bell motif of, hey, you got cheese, beans, rice, meat, and a shell, but how can we sell this differently? And they do it very well here. So here I go comparing Little Richard to Taco Bell.
So far we've compared Little Richard to hardcore punk, Sabrina Carpenter, and Taco Bell, man. Oh my goodness. I love our show.
Right. It's just, it's wild. It's wild. But I think it's safe that we can close things out with a final track number 12 on Here's Little Richard, and that is She's Got It.
And boy, does she got it. No, sorry. That was right there, yeah. Man. So
I know.
Yeah, obviously, a lot of the elements that we've discussed so far within the album are found here with, She's Got It. You get, great performances from Richard. The backing band's really solid. But the one thing that I noticed within this track here is like the track was playing with tempo pretty well, and like kind of, I don't know if it was just, the band really like, getting lost in the momentum of the song and really just, getting it. But like the band was speeding up and slowing down within various points of the track, and I thought that was pretty cool. And other than that, like again, not much else to write home about. It's a solid song though. Catch Me on Another Day. This could have been a top three song for me, but yeah, like sax solo here is great. Everything is pretty much solid here, and I think I was really just taken back by the band's infectiousness and like just really getting lost in the groove and how they sped up and slowed down together. I thought that was pretty cool. And in terms of like the lyrics here, the lyrics are basically are about a song who Richard wants to Tutti Frutti with.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that, and whatever that means is up to you as an interpreter. But my thoughts on She's Got It, I dug this track a bit too, although I will say I did notice how I mentioned earlier that there were two tracks on this whole album that were recorded basically in its own different session with completely different people. Like Earl Palmer's not on it. It's a whole list of different people. The first one was True Fine Mama. This is the other one. And here you can really tell. Like, the band sounds so much further back from a recording standpoint than any other track. Like, everything seems so upfront and in your face throughout this record, which for the most part sounds great. Like, full force rock and roll. But here it just sounds very studio and polished, which does cut the rock element of this track quite a bit, at least for the first, like, two-thirds. But towards the end, Little Richard does Little Richard things, and like you said, the sax solo not only sounds good, but also reestablishes the rock and roll feel of what is supposed to be a rock and roll song on this rock and roll record. Because the production doesn't do it. The production sounds very studio-esque. Like, it sounds very, hey, we found out what rock and roll was and we would like to make money off of it, please. How do we do this? Thank you. Now that we know how to do this, let's do this. Like, it doesn't have the same passion, but the sax does, Little Richard does, and that saves it from any sort of notoriety on my end. It's a solid track.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a solid track that very much establishes what the band was going for at the time. But yeah, I feel like that overall wraps up experiencing what the album brought to the table, and that pretty much wraps up the review. So we only have one thing left to say.
And that thing to say is, we did it.
We did it, man. We went up to Little Richard, and we were like, where's Little Richard? And he's like, here's Little Richard. And we experienced that.
Bravo! I was wondering how you were going to do this. I saw what you were doing there. So I'm gonna have you go first, if you don't mind, because I'm gonna let you put your thoughts out there, and then I'll sort of dive into my thoughts about the overall rating for this album.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I do recognize this album for what it is and what Little Richard brought to the table as being like the architect of rock and roll. And I do it's amazing that we create whenever you in our previous review or previous episode, you said that this album is a lot in terms of what it covers on the musical genre spectrum, in terms of what performances it dives into. It could be considered a jack of all trades. So yeah, I know we jokingly compared Little Richard to Taco Bell, Sabrina Carpenter, and hardcore punk music, but yeah, that I hate to say it, that basically sums up the album to a T. It's about feeling about just experiencing emotion and just really riding with the feeling. And you get tracks like Jenny and She's Got It that ended off the album with like different members of the group really just getting lost in the feeling, and like it's really good. It's a very important album for of its time. Obviously, like my beefs are there with like a couple of the songs off the record basically ripping off each other, and like I do understand within the context of the record, like that wasn't really a priority at the time. But it's just my opinion. It was my experience, and that's what the point of this show is, and the point of this episode is. So yeah, and like outside of that, like I did appreciate like a lot of the other tracks off the record in terms of like what they were bringing to the table. Like Can't Believe You Want to Leave was a highlight for me as well. I already shared some love for Jenny Jenny, and some of the other deeper cuts are pretty solid as well. But yeah, in terms of an overall rating, though, I'm going to give this album a solid 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10 on your end. So for me, you're right. This album is exactly what it says it is, which is, a very primitive first draft rock and roll record. Like, this is rock and roll at its most infantile, for lack of a better word. Like, a lot of the stuff sounds very, basic in a way that is almost wholesome, in a sense. But the performances throughout it are just very, very, very good for the most part. There are some where it does get, like you say, monotonous, and I can't unhear that. I can't unhear the monotony of this, but I can forgive it because, again, this was as primitive as it gets. Like, this album is so formulaic you could teach it in a science class. Like, that's how formulaic this record is. But what great performances there are on songs like Tutti Frutti, Jenny Jenny, Slippin and Slidin, Long Tall Sally. I'll even throw the likes of True Fine Mama in there. Like, there is not a whole lot to hate on this record. Now, granted, again, this is 1955, and this is well before the age of spilling your guts on record, like we talked about with Against Me at the start of this month. Or even parts of last week with Frank Ocean. But rock and roll hadn't discovered that yet, and I'm willing to recognize this for what it is. A great record to put on at the sock hop or on your turntable and just vibe out and dance. So I am grading on a little bit of a curve here because, again, we're talking about the 1950s. But I'm going to be giving this album an 8.5 out of 10.
All right. So your my 7, and your 8.5 average out to a unique total of 7.75 out of 10 because
math
works for everybody. It doesn't exclude anybody. But anyways, in terms of next album recommendations here, this was a little hard for me. Because again, I'm not like into the wheelhouse of like old school rock and roll, so I went with a album that had like by a group that was heavily inspired by Little Richard, and we talked about them at a couple different points here throughout this review, and like you can get the overall feel and like the overall vibe that was going for like a lot of some of the tracks here. And just the overall influence was like the thing I was more going for. And, that is the album Please Please Me by the Beatles. Excellent album. It's really rewarding to like check out not a psychedelic album by the Beatles, if I can only just label Please Please Me as that, like a good classic rock and roll album by the Beatles. So yeah. If you've enjoyed Here's Little Richard and you're looking for where I would want to, point the listener next, check out Please Please Me by the Beatles.
Excellent choice. That is a all-time great rock and roll record, and like you said, very much in the same vibes as this one. Maybe a little bit different, but that may be a discussion for another day. Who knows? My next recommendation for this album is one I actually decided to investigate while listening to this album, because I knew this album existed, but I never listened to it. And I knew of the person who made the album because that person was seen as an inspiration for Little Richard. It was the architect of the architect. But the album itself did not get released until 2 years after this album. So my recommendation is from 1959, and it is the self-titled release by the artist known as Escurita, or Escurita, if you will. And very much it is an album in the same vein as Here's Little Richard. Very much hard R&B, hard New Orleans style R&B. In a lot of ways, it sounds a lot rawer and a lot more pure, but in other ways, it sounds a little bit more monotonous. But again, the 50s, you can't fault them too much for it. So, Escurita by Escurita is my next album recommendation based off of Here's Little Richard.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, to summarize the overall ranking, overall album rating that we gave Here's Little Richard by Little Richard is a 7.75 out of 10. Matt recommends, in terms of the next album recommendation, Escurita by Escurita, self-titled. And I recommend Please Please Me in terms of a next album recommendation if you have enjoyed Here's Little Richard. And, like, just, if you want to expand your musical, taste, we're always a fan of that. So, yeah, man, we did it, man. We concluded our Pride Month celebration for the year of our Lord 2025.
Yes, it is, and it was a wild ride. We definitely covered a lot of avenues of rock and roll history and music history, and a lot of good stuff along the way. And I'm glad we did this, and perhaps, not even perhaps, we'll probably do this again next June and dig through some more artists in that regard. But as it is, we turn our attention over to July, and the first weekend of the month belongs to you, Ryan. Where are we going?
So, for a couple of different reasons, I'm going to Captain Phillips this here. And that is because the day that this is going to be released, it's only going to be literally one day after 4th of July. I mean, Lord willing and everything like that. So the target date for our next episode it's going to be July 5th. So keeping that in mind, this next review that we're going to do is actually going to be a listener request, and this request comes from my other friend Matt, who I have through fantasy hockey, keeping Carlson, just being a fantasy hockey nerd, dumb, that's out of the internet. He listens to our show, and he wanted us to cover, two albums, and I considered giving you the option, but I'm like, no, it's right there for the taking with 4th of July in America, why not? So, that being said, for our next review, we're going to be traveling to the year of our Lord, 1998, and we're going to be covering an album by The Offspring, and that album is called Americana.
All right, other Matt, I see you. I see what you're up to.
All right, so, yeah, Americana, man. Can't wait. So, anyways, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not listened to, or if it's been a while since you've checked out Americana by The Offspring, make sure you check out that album before next week's review. That way you can have opinions about the album, and then you can have opinions about the opinions that me and Matt are going to be bringing to the table. But yeah, man, that basically concludes this review. What do you got on the docket tonight, man?
I don't know, man. Probably just gonna start working on this, and then, hopefully everything goes smoothly, and I don't have to look at the tape and rip it up.